Hello. I wanted to talk to you tonight. Well, yeah, it is tonight. It's 10:48 my time. Rent Increase Prohibition, units with major code violations. Now, I wanted to talk to you again about the state's law that prohibits cities and towns from enacting rent restrictions. Now, this is from the Tenants Union of Washington State. It's from their website. Rent Increase Prohibition, units with major code violations. Carl Hagelin Law, aka no rent increase with major code violations. Seattle Prohibited Acts. SMC 22.206.180. The City of Seattle prevents landlords from raising rents on units which have severe code violations. The law requires tenants to take several steps in order to delay the rent increase, and all of the steps must be completed before the rent increase would come into effect. The first step is to determine if the repair problems in the tenant's unit qualify as major code violations. To do this, tenants should examine this list. There's a list here, and I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to tell you what the list is. Oh, it's a PDF file. Never mind. It'll take me forever to download it, but I'll tell you in a little bit what it means. The conditions which are bolded and marked with an asterisk are considered major violations and would prevent your landlord from raising the rent. Second, tenants must inform their landlords in writing that there are major repairs needed. What those repairs are specifically, and that if those repairs are not completed, the city law prevents the landlord from raising the rent. After the landlord has been notified by the tenants also need to contact the Department of Construction and Inspection at area code 206-615-0808 and request an inspection be done. Which means that once you've notified the landlord that there's major inspections, you call this number for the Department of Construction and Inspections. If they come by, even if it's major problem, major repair, the Department of Construction and Inspection could say, it's not that bad. Why are you calling us for it? The letter to the landlord and request for inspection from DCI must both be made before the rent increase is scheduled to take effect. Now, what I would do with the major repairs, what I would do is this. I would photograph the repairs that need to be done, the major repairs. Now, this is something I would do just as a protection. I would photograph the repairs, clearly photograph the repairs. I would document on a post-it note attached to the photographs that you print, and I would mail that to me. I would put that in a registered letter and I would send it to myself, which means that I have to sign for the letter when it's coming to me. That way there's a record that I received it, it's post-dated, or it's dated, and it's not been opened, that's something I would do personally. Technically, I'm an artist, and I draw, and I design things, and sometimes I have to send a copy of the artwork that I've designed to myself, especially if I'm seeking a patent and I don't want another company to rip me off. They can say, well, we came up with the design last week. Oh, really? Well, I came up with the design 4 years ago and I sent it to myself. The letter to the landlord and request for inspections from DCI must both be made before the rent increase is scheduled to take effect. Due to availability of city inspectors, it is possible that a tenant's unit will not be inspected until after the date of the rent increase. In this case, the tenant must pay the full amount of the rent increase. It is suggested to write paying under protest in the check memo along with the amount that is being paid under protest, which would be the amount the rent was increasing. Now, that right there tells me that this is made for people that can afford to pay the rent increase. And when I say afford to pay it, that doesn't mean that you have the money in your account and paying your rent is going to short you on groceries, gas for your car to get to work, washing your laundry. That just tells me that whoever can afford to pay the rent increase doesn't have to worry about being thrown out. Now, this here is another way for the landlords to get people out of the apartment. Okay, so there's crap that needs to be done to your apartment. Repairs. The faucet's not working right. The toilet won't flush right. The lights won't come on properly. The refrigerator's out and you need a new refrigerator. Basic things like that. The landlord knows that there's tenants in the building that need things repaired. Now, they're going to rent increase because they cannot afford to keep the building going at the current money they're charging for the rent. So what happens is they do the rent increase, and those that cannot afford to do the rent increase while they're waiting for things to be repaired are forced out. You can't pay the rent. You got to hightail it for the hills. It is suggested to write paying under protest in the check memo along with the amount that is being paid under protest, which would be the amount the rent was increasing. So you pay your rent and the amount of the rent increase, you pay that separately. You pay on the amount that your rent is normal. You make a separate check for the amount. Say it's like going to be raised $200 a month, $300 a month, whatever it is. You pay that extra, but you say, I'm paying this under duress, or I'm paying this under official protest. And you acknowledge the amount that the rent is being increased. After the unit has been inspected by DCI, which could take a long time, because let's face it, they're helping the landlords evict the elderly, the low income. They want good looking, money making hipsters that'll go out to parties every night, and they want people that are working at like Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook and people like that renting their apartments because they're the elite. And Seattle, for some odd reason, wants to go from being a city to being a hipster hideout. If the, let's see here, oh, after the unit has been inspected, DCI will determine if there are indeed major code violations. Now, having things that are not working right in your apartment, I don't know what the city codes are for the violations. I don't know what the cities for the major code violations would be, but I'm assuming that they have made the codes in such a way that basically your ceiling would have to fall in and the tenant above you would have to be in your living room. That's what I'm thinking. If there are major violations, tenants do not need to pay the rent increase, but are still responsible for the original rent. If the tenant has already paid the rent increase, they are entitled to a refund from their landlord or a credit to their account against future rent payments. The rent increase will go into effect after the landlord has made the necessary repairs and DCI has verified that they are complete. Now, upon making the repairs, that's going to be the landlord's excuse for why they did a rent increase. This means that if the repairs are finished and verified in the middle of the month, the tenants will need to pay a prorated portion of the rent increase. For example, if the repairs are verified on the 15th, then a tenant would need to pay half of the rent increase for that month. That is rent increase prohibited units with major code violations. Just cause eviction protection. Let me see what just cause is. Rental protection. Let me see what that says. Just cause eviction protection. Tenant union victory. This law exists because members of the tenant union work together and fought for it. If you have benefited from this law, go to tenant union membership to find out more about becoming a member to support the... See, I don't know too much about the tenants union. I haven't talked to them personally, but I can gather from what I'm seeing that they're just barely doing what they need to get by, and they're asking for loads of people to donate to them. The one thing that the tenants union should have been doing all along is fighting that stupid law that the state enacted stating that the cities and towns could not make rent restrictions possible, which gave run of the hill or run of the muck for the mafia don landlords. The city council doesn't like that term, so I'm going to keep using it. Mafia don landlords. Like when the mafia comes in, they take over the town and they make you pay tribute to the don. Protection money. When the landlords get an apartment, they use the apartment. Or when the mafia dons would take over a business, they would use the business until they couldn't use it no more, and they would torch it for the insurance money, and they'd go on to the next business. But the guys that owned the business came to the don, asked for help. Of course, it was asking for help from the don's own people that was causing the trouble in the first place. Anyway, this is SMC 22.206.160. Seattle landlord tenant laws. Okay, I'll read you that in a minute. The city of Seattle offers renters some modest additional protections that in other parts of Washington okay, let me repeat this. I'm slowing myself down. I'm reading a little too fast. The city of Seattle offers renters some modest additional protections than in other than in other parts of the Washington state. I think they worded that wrong. The city of Seattle offers renters some modest additional protections that other parts of the Washington state can't offer. These laws apply to all residential tenancies in the Seattle city limits. If you're unsure where your unit is located in the city limits of Seattle, you can look it up on the King County Parcel Viewer. The property report lists each address with a specific jurisdiction: City of Seattle, unincorporated King County, etc. Different laws in Seattle are regulated by different city departments. Some are enforced by the Seattle Police Department, and some by the Department of Planning and Development. Other DPD, or DPD, Department of Planning and Development, or DPD. If you would like more information on enforcement of landlord-tenant laws in the city of Seattle, the DPD can be reached at the Department of Planning and Development. If you're interested in landlord-tenant laws in the city of Seattle, this is just for you, Seattle, you can call area code 206, for you it's local, for everybody else it'd be long distance, 206-615-0808. That's the exact same number as the other number I posted in this video. The Just Cause Eviction Ordinance, or JCEO, was passed in Seattle as a result of the work of Seattle Renters and the Tenants Union of Washington. Now, I would like to have Seattle incorporate their own tenant union. Not the city council, not the mayor, not the police department, the actual renters. You and I, Seattle, us renters of Seattle, we would get together and we would do a tenant council. JCEO requires that Seattle landlords have just cause reasons to terminate tenancies or evict month-to-month or other periodic tenants. Tenants who pay rent weekly or twice a month. There are 18 total just causes listed in the ordinance, many more than there were in the past. Just causes for evictions includes non-payment of rent, non-compliance with lease terms, chronically late rent payments. I can see that. If you've not paid your rent and you're going to be there for a while and you still haven't paid your rent, regardless of what the reason is, the landlord can't have you there, because then they have to take you to court to evict you. Non-compliance with the lease terms. If the lease tells you you can't sell drugs out of the apartment, you can't hook your women out of the apartment and make it a red light district or anything like that, or if it's a sober living place and they tell you you can't have booze on the property and you decide you're going to not do that, I can see them evicting you. Another one is chronically late rent payments. Now, I can see that in Seattle. I can see a lot of people biting off more than they can chew. You get a nice job, you get yourself a nice apartment, you're paying $1,000, $500, $2,000. It's in a swanky area. Then you get a raise. Yeah, you get a raise. And you leave that apartment and you get a more expensive apartment. But then you find out you can't afford it. The rent's too high. So you're chronically late with your rent. Or, worse than that, you're on low income and they raise your rent and you can't afford to pay it because you're getting SSI, you're making $755 a month. You're making $755 a month. The rent was $500. Now it goes up to $600. Or better yet, it takes up your whole check just to keep the rent going. What do? You're chronically late with your rent. Now, it's a catch-22. Do they let you slide every month as long as they get their money? Nope. You'd have to have a heart to allow that to happen. And there's some people that just screw off their money and they're constantly late with their rent. They go to the casino, or they are a chronic alcoholic, or they're a drug addict and they screw off their money, or they just screw off their money, go buying a ton of stuff at the first of the month and they can't afford to pay the rent. Well, should the landlord allow that to keep happening? No. And the intention of the landlord to occupy the unit themselves or rent the unit to an immediate family member. Okay, just causes for eviction includes non-payment of rent, non-compliance with lease terms, chronically late rent payments, and the intention of the landlord to occupy the unit themselves or rent the unit to an immediate family member. The notice required for each just cause reason varies. Okay, now I don't understand how the landlord, it would be wrong for the landlord to occupy that unit or rent the unit to an immediate family member, because it's their apartment building. They can rent it to whoever they want, unless they rent it to a family member just to keep somebody out. That's wrong. The notice required for each just cause reason varies. Outside of city limits, there is no just cause protection for tenants, and landlords can ask tenants to not, outside the city limits, there is no just cause protection for tenants, and landlords can ask tenants not on a term lease. Oh, I read that wrong. Let me read it again. Outside the city limits, there is no just cause protection for tenants, and landlords can ask tenants not on a term lease to vacate with only 20 days written notice. See, sometimes when I get ahead of myself, I don't read things properly. That's a problem a lot of us have. We skim through things, we don't read it properly because we don't understand the writing of it. So the way it was written was, outside the city limits, there is no just cause protection for tenants, and landlords can ask tenants not on a term lease to vacate with only 20 days written notice. They should have put a comma after the word tenants and after the word lease. So it should have said, and landlords can ask tenants, comma, not on a term lease, comma, to vacate within 20 days written notice. The landlord cannot use just cause termination in retaliation for a tenant asserting their rights under landlord-tenant law or calling in a complaint with code enforcement, which means that you got a slumlord and he ain't fixing the apartments. You got all kinds of stuff. That needs to be repaired, and you're calling him to task, or you're calling her to task. The landlord can't retaliate. The landlord can't harass you, or the landlord cannot make your life a living hell. Seattle tenants experiencing retaliation can contact the DPD. I've already given you that phone number. This does not include tenants on leases whose tenancy ends when the lease ends, unless otherwise stated in the lease. Now, a lot of people don't tell you this, but a month-to-month lease can only be enforced if they make you re-sign the lease every month. They can't just make you sign the lease for the month you're in there and say, oh, you're on a month-to-month lease. You have to sign the lease every single month. If you do not sign a month-to-month lease every single month that you're living there, it reverts to a 6-month or a 12-month lease. Because you're no longer on a month-to-month, because every month they have to renew your lease and they have to make you sign it. A lot of people don't know that. And I bet you there's a lot of renters in Seattle that are on month-to-month leases and week-to-week leases that do not understand that either, I bet you. Seeking legal assistance as soon as possible if you are facing evictions in the city of Seattle. So it says seek legal assistance as soon as possible if you are facing evictions in the city of Seattle. Now, I'm not for sure about Seattle and the lawyers that are there, but I know in other places that I've lived in that if the lawyer is going to go against and rock the boat, they don't want to touch it. If you have defenses in an eviction lawsuit, you may be able to secure an attorney to represent you in court. Tenants in Seattle who are facing evictions can contact the Legal Action Center or King County Bar Association's Housing Justice Project. Really? The most common uses can cause reasons. The most commonly used just cause reasons given to month-to-month tenants in Seattle are failure to pay rent or comply with the rules of the rental agreement. Tenants must respond within the time period. If they do not, the landlord has a just cause reason to initiate an eviction action. For more detailed information on eviction notices and eviction processes, see evictions. I'll get to that later. 2. Rent is consistently paid late. Now, this is what we talked about earlier, about rent being paid late consistently. Tenant regularly does not comply with the rules of the rental agreement. Now, I've kind of mentioned that too. You do a lot of things that are against the lease, and you're disturbing your neighbors, and you're running up and down the halls, naked, screaming, "Buka buka," they'll terminate you or put you in a mental hospital. Landlord intends to occupy the unit themselves or rent it to an immediate family member. In order to use this just cause reason, there must not be another comparable unit available in the building. Immediate family is considered a domestic partner, spouse, parent, grandparent, sibling, or child. If the landlord uses this just cause reason to end a tenancy, the tenant is entitled to 20 days. Oh, if they're going to throw you out, I understand this now. Earlier I didn't understand it. If you have an apartment and the landlord wants to end your lease or end your arrangement of living there because they want to move in their daughter or their son, and they kick you out, and there's no other availabilities in the building, they can't do that. If the landlord uses this just cause reason to end the tenancy, the tenant is entitled to 20 days written notice before the day that the rent is due. The landlord or landlord's family member must occupy the unit for at least 60 days consecutive during the 90-day period after the tenant moves out. If the landlord or the family member does not occupy the unit for those 60 consecutive days, the tenant may file a complaint. So, if I'm the landlord and you're the tenant, Seattle, I'm talking to you now. If I'm a landlord and you're a tenant and I want to boot you out because I've got somebody else that I want to live there, but I'm using my family or extremely close friend as a reason to move you out, and I give you 20 days notice before the rent is due. If the person I move in there doesn't stay in that apartment for at least 60 days and they leave, but see, how are you really going to know that? How are you going to know that the person left? How are you going to know that the person that the landlord moved in there is the same person still living there or not living there? See, this doesn't make any sense. There again, playing into the landlord's favor. The Mafia Don landlord. The landlord or the landlord's family member must occupy the unit for 60 consecutive days during the 90-day period after the tenant moves out. If the landlord or the family member does not occupy the unit for 60 days, the tenant may file for a complaint with the DPD and may pursue the landlord for damages up to $2,000 in small claims court. But how are you going to be able to prove it? Yeah. They know that you're not. They know you're not going to pursue that. That's why they've included that in here. That's like, oh yeah, go ahead, search my apartment. Yeah, search my apartment. Go ahead. They're hoping that you won't do that. They know you won't do that. And 9 times out of 10, most people won't. Here, they know that if you get evicted, you're not going to pursue that. 99% of all the people that get evicted don't pursue that because it's too big of a headache and too much of a hassle. They just want to find a new place and move on with themselves. The owner decides to sell a single-family dwelling unit. Seattle tenants living in a single-family dwelling unit that are, Seattle tenants living in single-family dwelling units that are being put up for sale are entitled to 60 days written notice before the end of the rental period. That means that if you're renting an apartment and it's being put up for sale, you're entitled to 60 days written notice before the end of a rental period. Single-family dwelling units are houses designed to hold a single family, not apartment buildings, duplexes, or triplexes. It's like the rent-to-own houses. You know, you're not paying for the house. You're not trying to buy the house. You're renting it. Some people rent to own, which, you know, you're on a lease or whatever. You're renting to own it. These are for people that are just renting a house. Somebody's got a 4-bedroom house. They're renting it, but then they decide they want to get it out of their hair and they want to sell it. They have to give you 60 days written notice before they can put it up for sale. "60 days before a rental period." So, like, your rent's coming up for the month of June. Oh, well, they had to give you at least 60 days notice before that. Single-family dwelling units are houses designed to hold a single family, not an apartment building, duplexes, or triplexes. Within the 30 days after the tenant leaves, the landlord must take action to list and show the unit, which means they can't just say they're going to sell it just to get your ass out of there. They have to actually show that they're going to put it on the market and they're going to show it because they're actually going to sell it. They can't just decide, oh, I don't like the tenant or I don't like the family for political reasons. Say you're Democrats or you're independents and you voted for Bernie Sanders and they didn't like that. They're staunch Republicans, so they kind of want to get other like-minded Republicans in there. So they say, well, hey, fellas, yeah, we decided to put the house up for sale. We don't want it anymore. It's too big of a headache. And I'd say, okay, that's fine. We've got 60 days to find a new place. Well, at the last minute, you say after I've left, you say, well, darn it, you know what? I decided to keep that place after all. Can't do that. You got to put it up on the market within 30 days, and you got to start showing it to prospective buyers. And then it says the landlord must continue to try to sell the unit for 90 days after they first listed the unit and show the unit. If the landlord does not go through with these steps as described in the JCEO, the tenant may file a complaint with the DPD and may pursue the landlord for damages of up to $2,000 in small claims court or other appropriate courts. And now, see, that's easier to do. Once you are finding a new place to live, you can double back to the old house you were living in, and you can see if it's up for rent or if it's up for sale, because there'll be a for sale sign in the front yard. If you're a month-to-month Seattle tenant living in a non-single family dwelling unit, the sale of the property is not considered a just cause reason for termination, which means that if an owner owns the building and it's just too much, he's bit off more than he can chew, or say he's getting older and the family doesn't want to take over the property, and he decides to sell it to a new owner, you're getting evicted. If the new owners don't decide to keep you on, you'll know what they're going to do with it. Now, if the new owner decides to keep you on and keep it the way it was before, and he's just the old owner is just selling it because he can't handle having it anymore due to health reasons, or he's getting old, or he just got burned out and he doesn't want it anymore. The new tenant, the new owners can say, yep, I'm going to leave the rent the way it is, and I'm going to keep the tenants, because you guys have been good tenants. You've lived here for 10, 15 years. You pay your rent on time, and it's a moneymaker. And I'm keeping it the way it is. Because let's face it, you evict everybody and you remodel it, you've got to jack up the rent in order to cover the cost of the remodel. Now, you jack up the rent from, say, $1,000 a month to $3,000 a month, you'll find renters, because there's tons of people out there that need it. But it would be better to keep something that's tried and true than to go into untested waters. If you're a month-to-month, okay. Read the SMC 22.206.160 for the complete list of just cause reasons. The DPD is responsible for regulating and enforcing the JCEO in Seattle. If a notice is issued for a tenant improperly, the DPD has the authority to rescind the notice. If a notice is issued to a tenant improperly, the DPD has the authority to rescind the notice. The DPD can be reached at phone number, again, area code 206-615-0808. Now, fair housing in Seattle. Tenant locations assistant, total tenant relocation assistance, right to organize, Seattle notice laws, condo conversations, and Seattle tenant resources. Those are things that I will put in my next video. I will go each video and I will do a small tiny video on these, because these are not really that long. And I think that if I do smaller videos, they'll be easier to keep up with for you, the Seattleite, and the Washingtonian that is thinking of maybe moving to Seattle. This has been All Things Considered, because I consider all things. Have a good night, Seattle. May God bless you in all that you do. And I will see you tomorrow.